Oftentimes, you'll hear these Afro-American Negroes tell you that it's the ongoing legacy of slavery that led to the sad state of affairs for the Afro-American Negro today. Now, when you listen to that statement, it sounds like it has the ring of truth, but when you start looking at the facts and the historical documents behind this statement, you start to see how ridiculous it sounds. Now, we look at history and we look at slavery. Slavery in America ended in 1865 with the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. And after the Civil War, when the when slavery ended, we had African Americans pretty much building their own towns, building their own businesses, and even getting into political office in the South during the Reconstruction period. So when we look at that argument saying that there was an ongoing legacy of slavery, clearly, right after slavery ended and the Civil War ended, we clearly see that black people were pretty much doing the things that everyone does in America when they are given an equal opportunity. When we look at this ongoing legacy of slavery argument, that pretty much right there refutes that idea that there was some sort of legacy to slavery. Yes, there was racism in the South, and yes, there was terrorism in the South, and that terrorism by the Ku Klux Klan was done after a Democrat was elected to be president, and Democrats took charge in the South. Now, that's why you had these Ku Klux Klan and this terrorism, which led to the lynchings and the murders of black people in the South. But no one wants to talk about that. When you talk to the Negro, he tells you it has to do with slavery. But that's not the case at all. When we look at the bigger picture of black history, we see that it wasn't slavery that was the issue, because slavery was dealt with by the Constitution, by the 13th and 14th Amendments, and that Emancipation Proclamation. And after slavery, when they did the Reconstruction, the troops were down south, and at that time, black people were building their own homes, their own businesses, and their own towns. And it was only after the election of a Democrat that led to the removal of those troops, and then these poor whites who were angry at who were really angry at rich white people decided to take their anger and frustration out on black people. And these poor whites, angry because they were frustrated about losing the Civil War, decided they wanted to get their revenge on black people. And the black people were being used as a scapegoat by your Ku Klux Klan, your Democratic Party, and other business interests to have someone to blame for the dysfunctional state of white people. So they were using that as their reason to attack black people. Black people were pretty much, they were getting it together, they were getting it right during that Reconstruction time, and they were still trying to get it right, even in spite of all the terror that they had to encounter dealing with these racists. Now, these racists they really have no direction, they really had no focus. They were too cowardly to go after these rich white people, so they decided to terrorize and attack black people. And it clearly showed the world how codependent these racists truly were, because when we look at these racists, these Klansmen, these poor whites, they really did not want anyone to come up. They wanted to remain in a position as a victim of the Civil War, and they wanted to remain at the bottom. They didn't want to change anything, and they didn't want to deal with change. And that's been the big problem with dealing with these white racists. But I'm going to get back to this argument for this ongoing legacy of slavery, because we clearly see that there really was no legacy of slavery, because if these black people who were slaves and former slaves could go out, a few years later and start building their own businesses, building their own towns, and even running for political offices such as Congress, senator. Some of them were mayors, and they were amassing not only economic and political power. Then how does that connect with what's going on with the modern day Afro American Negro? I mean, I look at history from the big picture, and it shows me that even in spite of policies created by Democrats like Jim Crow in the South and discrimination in the North, black people still managed to persevere. Yes, they couldn't get the good jobs at white businesses, but they managed to create their own businesses and their own economic infrastructure. I mean, I look at neighborhoods here in Harlem like your Sugar Hill, which was built up with black money, and it shows me that there was a way for black people to make success for themselves in spite of the obstacles put in front of them. But according to some of these pro-blacks and other Negroes out here, the the state of the Afro-American Negro has to do with this ongoing legacy of slavery. Where is this legacy if we see clearly after the Civil War, black people were pretty much building a life for themselves in the South. And then even after the terrorism of the Ku Klux Klan, we saw this great migration to the North, and we saw black people building their own neighborhoods, building their own communities, building their own families, building things and establishing communities for themselves. But when we look at the bigger picture of history, we see that where the legacy of dysfunction for the modern day Afro-American Negro starts. Because when we look at that picture, we see it starting with your integration. When the Negro decided he wanted to integrate into society and become part of the great American melting pot, he pretty much threw away all the things that would have allowed him to compete on an economic level. Instead of him embracing and supporting his own businesses and protecting his own businesses and his own business infrastructure, what he decided to do was he decided that the white man's ice was colder. And because, like Ralph Ellison said in his own book, Invisible Man, he could get that serge suit from Barney's, he decided he didn't want to go to the black tailor. He wanted to go to Barney's, to the same white man who had been disrespecting him for years. And he wanted to go sit at that Woolworth's counter. And when he did that, he took his black dollars and handed them right over to the same racist who discriminated against him. Moreover, he decided he didn't want to work at his own businesses. He wanted to work at the white man's businesses and get more money instead of building his own infrastructure, his own trade, and his own resources. And even worse, he decided he didn't want to go to his own schools. Now, according to the Civil Rights Act of 1965, everything was pretty much going to be equal in terms of government funding. However, your Afro-American Negro, as brainwashed as he was with cognitive distortion, believing that white was better, decided he wanted to go to the white school and not make his black schools on the same level of standards by using that funding to buy things like brand new books, improve the infrastructure of the schools with a quality classroom, hiring quality teachers of color, and maintaining a standard that would be equal. No, your Afro-American Negro wanted to go to the white school, and he thought being bused to this white school would mean that he would get a better education. The big problem with your Afro-American Negro is that he believes white is better. And this has been the big problem with the modern day Afro-American Negro, because this is the culture he has been taught over the last, I'd say, century or so, that white was better and being accepted by whites was considered to be the thing. Instead, that's not what you want to do when you want to establish an economic condition and a cultural condition for your people. When you want to establish those standards, you don't want to look for the acceptance of somebody else's standard. And this is where the Negro pretty much fell into decline, because he wanted the acceptance of white people, he wanted the approval of white people, and that's why he's always behind the eight ball, because as long as you're chasing somebody else's standard, you are going to lose. Because when you chase somebody else's standard, when you look for somebody else's approval, you are giving that person power. And that's one of the main reasons why your Afro-American Negro is in the sad state that he's in right now. That, and also the sad state of affairs when it came down to the gender divide with your Afro-American Negro, because your Afro-American Negro woman, pretty much what she did was she wanted to be accepted by white women, so she joined the feminist movement, and she thought by joining the feminist movement she would be just like a white woman, and she thought she would get the approval of white women. And when she did that, she also joined ahead along with white liberal politicians who came to the Negro, Negro female, telling her she would get some sort of economic advantage by participating in his welfare state. Again, using the Afro-American Negro's own cognitive distortion against them, because they always believe that the white man's ice is the coldest in the room. Again, proven to the world that the temperature of ice is 0, but the Negro believes that the white man's ice is colder, and the Negro woman believes the white man's ice is the coldest of them all. And because they believe this, they believe that joining that welfare state would take them to the next level and allow them to compete. Not understanding that African Americans had been competing for years. They had their own economic engine. They had their own businesses. They had their own homes. They had their own infrastructure. But they gave that all away to white people because they wanted to integrate. They wanted to be a part of white society. They wanted to be accepted by someone else. And when they did that, they not only gave away their economic power, they gave away their political power, and they gave away their personal power, because this is the big issue with the Negro. They love white people. They want to be accepted by white people. They want the approval of white people. And this is why they are in the sad state they're in right now. Because the Negro, for the most part, wants to be accepted by white people. And they always see themselves as second best. You look at any other ethnic group, they don't see themselves as second best. The Negro, on the other hand, always sees himself as second best. And not only second best to not only to whites, but second best to Hispanics, second best to Asians, second best to Arabs, second best to Indians. He puts himself at the bottom position instead of creating a standard where he says his standard is better than anybody else's standard. And this is why the Negro is at the bottom of the world, not because of an ongoing legacy of slavery. Again, we look at Negroes who came out of slavery, and their viewpoint of the world was completely different. I believe if we gave those same slaves the resources and tools that we have today, they would build a thriving black community that would be the equal of a country like Japan or China. And they would build a country, economic situation that would create a thriving black community that would be the envy of the world. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.